Today, we are here at the George Mackey Library in Delta, um, launching The Ray of Hope, a book by the good doctor who had lost his entire family in Canada. And after that, to deal with that issue, which is humongous for anyone and tragic, um, he actually went back to India, returned to India, took all of his belongings and all of his assets, and set up a school for children and to educate the children. And I understand that, out of a very, very tragic and a difficult situation, he's built a life for himself, a purpose for himself, as well as obviously he's making the children's lives that he educates obviously wonderful. And I had an opportunity to see him at the Vancouver East Cultural Center many, many years ago when there was a documentary that was made on his life. It was screened, and I hold him in the highest esteem. I admire people who can turn such tragedy into such triumph for the world. Well, we every year deal with the tragedy of AirIndia, and we gather at the memorial to pay tribute to the victims and admire the families that have made a life for themselves after such a huge tragedy. We also go there to remind the police to continue the investigation. As well, we try and make sure that we continue to pursue some closure for the families that have been left behind. But there has been a certain section in the politics and the society of this country that has been in constant denial about the AirIndia. Some of them are truthers or near truthers who think somebody else did it. But there is so much evidence that Mr. Parmar was the brainchild. It was Mr. Parmar's brainchild. He was the mastermind of AirIndia. Mr. Riyat, who has been convicted of the Narita explosion, he pled guilty to the AirIndia manslaughter. He confessed to making the bombs for Mr. Parmar. Mr. Parmar, before the AirIndia explosion, before the Narita explosion, said Indian planes would fall from the skies, and the AirIndia plane obviously fell. The other plane obviously was damaged. At least the people were killed on the ground at Narita. And then on top of that, we've had the Supreme Court of British Columbia, the judge, the defense, and the prosecutors say that agree that it was Mr. Parmar who masterminded the AirIndia disaster. We've had the judicial inquiry by Mr. Justice Major. That also concluded that it was Mr. Parmar that led the conspiracy to bomb AirIndia and cause the Narita explosion. Despite all of this evidence, this mountain of evidence, there are politicians and there are ordinary people in this country that continue to glorify the murderer, Talwinder Parmar, the terrorist Talwinder Parmar and his associates. There are several dozen people that I know across this country. There are several politicians that I know that glorify this murderer every year at the various parades. They go to the stages where these guys' photos are displayed. They go to stages where there is a cry for dismemberment of India, to separate it into what they want, Khalistan, out of it. And so, I just want to make sure that on this day, at least we remember that the families of AirIndia victims haven't had closure. They would only have closure, they could have closure, rather, if the politicians and other people in this country stopped portraying the likes of Parmar as martyrs, and closure if the police could continue to work and perhaps bring charges, new charges against the old people or new charges against new people.